Under the quiet hum of the small Mexican town of San Miguel, there existed secrets woven deep within family ties. Elena was a woman of captivating beauty. Her dark, expressive eyes held mysteries of their own. She had married young, to Carlos, a mild-mannered hard-working man from a family with old roots and complicated layers. But beneath the loving image Elena presented to the world, she had a secret that could ruin lives, and eventually it would. Carlos was an only child, the adored son of Juan. Juan had been a widower for many years, raising Carlos alone after his wife passed. This was a man hardened by loss and the struggle of managing their modest farm. He was stoic, self-assured, and at times intense, a sharp contrast to his gentle son. Perhaps it was this intensity that drew Elena into Juan's orbit, as much as her own dissatisfaction with Carlos' quiet disposition. What started as fleeting glances and stolen moments soon turned into a full-blown affair. There was something forbidden, almost electric, about it. Elena felt a thrill she'd never known, an escape from her daily life and the routine of her marriage. Juan, in his aging loneliness, was no less captivated by her beauty and passion. Their affair was dangerous, but the danger was intoxicating for them both. They kept their secret for months, meeting in the shadows and behind closed doors. However, as secrets often do, theirs began to unravel. Carlos, who was often oblivious to matters beyond the farm, noticed subtle changes in Elena. Her absences, her sudden mood swings, her distance, all were unlike her. It planted a seed of doubt in his mind, a suspicion that refused to leave. And so, late one night, he followed her. What Carlos saw that night in his father's small, dimly lit house was enough to shatter his heart and set him on a path of no return. There, he found his wife in an embrace with his own father. His fury, disbelief, and betrayal were so intense, it blurred his vision and twisted his very sense of reality. He left without a sound, but he knew what he had to do. For weeks, Carlos barely spoke to either Elena or Juan, who each felt the dread of his suspicion but didn't confront it, hoping against hope that he hadn't discovered the truth. But they were mistaken. Carlos was planning something, waiting for the right moment to confront them both. He spent those days seething, a silent volcano on the verge of eruption. One evening, Carlos invited his father over for a drink, pretending to reconcile. Elena was out, and Carlos made sure it was just the two of them. As they sat in the dim candlelight, Carlos's words were calm, disconcertingly so. "I know," he said, barely above a whisper. Juan's face drained of color, his hand faltering as he held his glass. But Carlos didn't stop. He confronted his father, revealing that he'd seen everything. Each detail that Carlos listed felt like a cut to Juan, a father who had betrayed his only son. When Juan tried to explain himself, his words were drowned out by Carlos's rage. In a moment of uncontrollable anger, Carlos lashed out, grabbing the knife that lay on the table and plunging it into his father's chest. He watched, breathing heavily, as Juan's life ebbed away in stunned silence, his face frozen in an expression of regret and sorrow. When Elena returned home, she found Carlos standing over Juan's body, blood staining his hands. She knew instantly that her life was over as well. Carlos looked at her with a terrifying coldness and spoke in a voice she barely recognized. "You were mine, and now you're nothing." In the end, the townspeople would find out about the horrific murder, but the tale of betrayal and forbidden passion would remain in whispers, shadows cast by the street lamps. Carlos was sentenced, but his punishment was nothing compared to the eternal suffering that would linger in the memories of those who had known him. Elena's life became a quiet, endless penance, haunted by her lover's murder and the ruin her own desires had brought. And in San Miguel, the story became a legend, a reminder of the price of betrayal and the fatal consequences that sometimes come with the darkest secrets. In the days that followed the murder, a heavy silence fell over San Miguel. Gossip flared like wildfire, and within hours, nearly everyone in town had heard a version of the tale. Whispers circulated about Carlos's breakdown, his descent from a respected young man to a criminal bound by vengeance. Yet, beyond the scandal, something felt eerie, like an unfinished story, a wound left raw and open. Elena, now alone and despised, became a ghost in her own life. The townspeople glared at her as if she herself had wielded the knife, and they weren't entirely wrong. She moved out of her marital home, leaving behind memories too painful to face, and took a small room on the edge of town. She barely slept, plagued by recurring nightmares of Juan's dying face, Carlos's anguished fury, and the grotesque feeling that she was responsible for it all. Then, one night, as Elena lay awake, staring at the cracks in her ceiling, she heard a noise. A soft, insistent tapping. She held her breath, straining her ears. It sounded as if someone were outside her window, calling her name in a low, hoarse whisper. Her heart raced, terror flooding her veins. She tried to tell herself it was nothing, just her mind playing tricks on her. But the sound persisted, and soon it seemed to echo in her ears, a constant reminder of the blood on her hands. Unable to take the haunting, Elena resolved to confront her fears. She went to the local priest, a man known for his deep wisdom and quiet compassion, hoping to unburden herself. Father Matteo had heard countless confessions, but none like hers. She confessed everything: her affair, her betrayal, her guilt over the murder. He listened intently, his expression grave, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Elena," he said quietly, his voice steady yet filled with an unspoken warning, "sometimes, sins do not end with forgiveness. Some sins have a way of lingering, even after we repent." Father Matteo's words filled her with dread, but she tried to ignore it. She left the church feeling somewhat lighter, but as she walked back through the deserted town, an unsettling sensation followed her like a shadow. It was as if unseen eyes were watching her, weighing her down with judgment. That night, her nightmares grew worse. This time, she saw Juan himself, not as the man she once shared secret passions with, but as a ghostly figure pale with a piercing, accusatory gaze. His eyes seemed to burn into her soul, exposing every ugly truth she tried to hide. She awoke drenched in sweat, her heart racing. But it wasn't just a dream. His voice was there again, real and inescapable, whispering her name as though he were in the room. Soon, Elena couldn't tell where reality ended and her guilt began. She became withdrawn, disoriented, and neighbors began to avoid her entirely, muttering that she was cursed. Her health deteriorated as she refused to eat, barely slept, and seemed consumed by the past. Rumors spread that she was losing her mind, that perhaps Juan's spirit was haunting her. Some even speculated it was Carlos's spirit, returning to punish her for her betrayal. One night, she reached her breaking point. Driven by the whispers and the guilt that seemed to gnaw at her very being, she returned to the scene of the crime, the place she had once called home. She walked through the silent house, past the kitchen where the bloodstains had long since faded, through the living room where she and Carlos had once shared laughter. Every corner of the house seemed to echo with memories that now felt like specters. In her mind, she heard the whispers, louder than ever, each word filled with pain and accusation. Finally, she could take it no more. In desperation, she cried out, begging for forgiveness from Carlos, from Juan, from anyone who would listen. But the house remained silent, save for the creaks of old wood and the faint sound of the wind outside. The townspeople found her the next morning, slumped in the corner of the old house, her eyes wide with terror and her voice whispering words no one could understand. They called it madness, a result of guilt too heavy for one soul to bear. For weeks, she lay catatonic in the local hospital, her body alive but her mind seemingly locked away in another realm. Some said she could hear Juan's voice, calling her to join him. Others said she saw visions of Carlos's tortured face, unable to forgive her. Whatever the truth, Elena's mind was a prison from which she would never escape. Years passed, and the memory of the affair and the murder faded from the town's consciousness. But whenever the wind blew on a quiet night, the townsfolk would still talk in hushed tones about the curse of betrayal, warning young lovers of the sins that could never be forgiven, and the ghosts that refused to rest. And in that old abandoned house, some claimed they could still hear the faint sound of a woman's whispers, mourning the love and lives she had lost. The years rolled on, yet the shadows of betrayal, murder, and grief lingered like ghosts within the walls of San Miguel. Elena's story became a cautionary tale, a spectral warning that echoed through the town's cobbled streets. Children grew up hearing the tale of La Viuda Traicionera, the treacherous widow, whom they were told would visit the dreams of the faithless, taking them by the hand into her endless night of remorse. Elena never regained her sanity. She remained at the town's modest hospital, her days merging into a blur of silent, haunted stares. The nurses would whisper that she spoke to invisible figures, eyes darting to corners of the room and mouth forming words only she could hear. The doctors found no remedy for her torment. All they could do was let her drift further into her fractured world. One stormy evening, Elena's tortured vigil came to an end. The rain fell in torrents, battering the rooftops, and the wind howled like a lamenting soul. At midnight, Elena rose from her bed with a clarity that had been absent for years. Her movements were purposeful, almost serene, as if she were being guided by an unseen hand. The nurses on duty found her bed empty the next morning. It wasn't long before they discovered her footprints, leading out the hospital doors and through the mud-slick streets, all the way to the abandoned house where Carlos had killed Juan so many years ago. When they found her, she was lying on the dusty floor, her hands crossed over her chest as if in peace, her face serene but lifeless. Elena had returned to the place of her sins, to the ghosts that had haunted her, to finally confront what had been consuming her soul. The townsfolk murmured that it was Juan, or perhaps Carlos, who had come to claim her at last. Perhaps, they whispered, she had followed them willingly. In the months that followed, people claimed to hear strange sounds from the old house. Late at night, a faint, sorrowful whisper could sometimes be heard drifting from its darkened windows, a soft voice carrying on the wind. "Perdoname, forgive me." Elena's voice, they believed, echoing from beyond the grave. No one dared enter the house anymore. It was a place forsaken by both the living and the dead. The townspeople boarded up its windows and doors, leaving it to the wind, the shadows, and the souls it held captive. Over time, the story of Elena and her forbidden affair with her father-in-law faded into local legend. The house became a symbol of betrayal, and people who passed by would cross themselves, offering a silent prayer to ward off its cursed energy. Children grew up fearful of the place, daring each other to go near its peeling walls, but none ever ventured too close. It became a haunted relic, a warning wrapped in brick and dust. And so the years passed, and Elena's tale dissolved into folklore, a ghostly myth that would forever be woven into the soul of San Miguel. The whispers of betrayal, of forbidden love and unforgivable sin, continued to haunt the town, like echoes of an eternal penance. In the end, all that remained of Elena's life, her forbidden love, and the blood spilled in a fit of fury, was a warning that love, when bound in lies, carries its own brand of retribution. Her story became part of the town's very bones, a reminder that some transgressions cannot be forgiven, some secrets cannot be buried, and some ghosts refuse to rest.